Although most Yowie reports over the last 200 years have generally conformed to most Yowie descriptions and behaviours, there are a percentage that appear to perhaps be a species of their own. Or are they? The odd reports include double row teeth, dog-like snout, being more hominid than hominid, and backwards facing feet. This was an anomaly first reported prior to 1850. In the Australian and New Zealand Monthly magazine, dated February 1842, they quoted the natives of the time describing the then named Yahoo or Devil being able to turn their feet backwards. It was said to do this while fleeing humans, so the imprint of the foot appears to be travelling from the opposite direction. This was again mentioned in the newspapers during the early 1900s. In 1902, the Barrel Free Press notes the same attribute, writing backwards turned feet and toes being where the heels should be. Clearly, this is the exception rather than the rule. When there's an anomaly seldom reported, yet often enough to take notice of, it can't be ignored and often adds to the complexity of the subject. The AYR has many modern reports of witness sightings describing the movement of the Yowie while in the all-fours position. Some using the term spider-like, with the legs and feet in unusual positions. Is this a differing species, a deformity, or performed at will? In 1870, a girl by the name of Ella Harper was born in Tennessee with her knees turned backwards. Due to this deformity, she preferred to walk on all fours because this was her natural locomotion. And still today, there are similar cases all over the world. Yet on the other hand, or foot, there are people in the world such as Maxwell Day from London who can naturally turn his feet in the opposite direction. Or Michigan man Moses Lanham who can easily turn his entire lower legs 180 degrees in reverse. When we learn this can happen naturally in human society, it doesn't sound so far-reached for a hominid to do the same. But again, I think it's the exception. All this information pertains to today's sighting report. We head west of the Blue Mountains to a location with neighbouring Yowie reports from Roseburg to the east, Ophir, Piramal and Bacobal, Rylestone and Mudgee, Oberon, Bathurst and Sunny Corner. The area's alive, many of which you can listen to on our YouTube Witness audio reports and podcasts. It's here I hand you over to AYR's Sarah Bignell as I say, welcome to Molong.
Thanks so much for reaching out and getting in touch with us. Really appreciate it. We've got a couple of other reports describing a spider-like posture and movement. Just describe in as much detail as you can what happened, and I won't interrupt you, and then I'll ask you some follow-up questions after that.
My son and I go down to the creek and we do bow fishing for carp. Because we've been down a couple of times, the carp get a little bit used to us, and the second that we turn up, they disappear. So we thought we'd go down to see if they come out after dark. I started the mule, which is the vehicle that we use on the farm, and we drove down to the creek. It's about 1 kilometre from the house. When we got down to the edge of the creek, we probably stopped 40 metres, 50 metres away from where we'd normally stop to actually go to the creek. Probably for the first time ever too, I didn't turn a torch on, and we just crept along relatively quietly, although, walking through the thistles and the tall grass, you just can't do it quietly. But we did it as best we could. Anyway, we got to the edge of the creek banks. That's when I just turned the torch on. It's just a good little LED torch, and I had it on the lower setting so I didn't scare any of the fish. And then when I looked left, I didn't see any fish. I looked right, I didn't see any fish, but I did notice something just on the other side of the bank. I'm guessing probably from where we were standing at, or somewhere around the 20 metres anyway. I haven't really sort of stopped to consider exactly how far, but less than 20 metres. And on the other side of the bank, there's about a 30, 40 centimetre drop straight to the creek. And then there's a little bit of an inclined plateau where there's some kikuyu grass, probably about 3 metres maybe. And that leads back nice and short. It's really, it looks like it's mown. That's when I saw something on the ground. It was relatively flat. It was a very square shape, very hairy and shaggy, sort of shambly hair. It was quite dark, but you could still see a little bit of maybe sort of brown, a tiny little bit of red, but, essentially it was a dark colour. At first, second and third, I just couldn't really sort of grasp what I was looking at in terms of what animal. It just, nothing from my memories of anything related to what I was looking at. And I was trying to work out, was it a kangaroo lying down? Was it a wobbly, sort of sitting in a strange position? Certainly wasn't a dog or a cat or a fox or any of that sort of thing. It was just a completely different body shape to a wombat. So I thought, that's interesting. I need to get a better look at that. So I turned the torch up and I said to my son, mate, do you want to have a look? What I'm looking at, I don't think you're ever going to see again in your lifetime, mate. And he said, what is it, Dad? And I said, I honestly don't know. And he refused to come out from behind me. And he said, Dad, I don't want to look at it. I just don't want to look at it. He didn't come out at all during the whole process. But when I turned the torch up, I was able to get a better look. But still, the perspective was just wrong. I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Was I looking at an animal on its side? Was I looking at an animal on its belly that was off the ground? Was I looking at the bottom of an animal or a kangaroo that had been tailed? I just couldn't work it out. I turned the torch up one more time. So full is incredibly bright. You're basically looking at daylight, really. That's when it looked up. And I realised that it was actually facing me on its belly, but off the ground, so it was supporting its weight.
How long was the hair on the body?
Somewhere around 3 to 4 inches, maybe a fraction less. It looked quite shabby, like it was, in part shedding a winter coat in some spots. In other spots, it just looked that little bit nicer, but generally, as an overall description, it was shabby and quite thick. It was hair. It wasn't a coarse looking fur. You would have said it was a coarse hair, but not a coarse fur. I didn't notice any hair that was longer in terms of, like an alpha hair, if that's sort of one way to describe it. It was just shabby hair. A hairy goat, it has undulations in the hair and the fur, and that's pretty much how the back of this thing looked. It had those slight undulations, but it was just flat. It looked up. When it looked up, it was quite interesting in as much as that it looked at me in a, this is really inconvenient. Don't put the torch on me, and I don't like you being here. You've sort of, you've mucked up whatever it was that it was doing. And it was at that point that I realised what I was looking at was just absolutely incredibly unique. And I begged my son, please have a look, mate. Please have a look. This is something that you will never, ever, ever get the chance to see ever again. Again, he just wouldn't. He wouldn't come out from behind me. Anyway, what I could see was, I think, the brow line, sort of the ridge of the brow, and that went basically across the whole head, a little bit of the nose. I could definitely see some of the cheekbone of one side. I don't remember seeing lips, but there was basically 3 lines of light that were reflecting. And I thought there was the nose, the cheek, and the brow ridge. I didn't see any eyes. The thing that really sort of confused me about the whole situation was there was no clearly defined head outline like you would expect on a normal animal. So a normal animal, its head's clearly sitting proud of its body in some way. Even a wombat, they're little nuggets, but their head is clearly defined as separate to the body. This wasn't ordinary. It was just a little tiny bit of a slight exaggeration of the shape. That was pretty hard to sort of understand, I guess, until you'd seen something like that. It was, difficult to appreciate.
Yeah.
Next thing that happened was that it slowly started to look down, and then it slowly started to take a couple of steps backwards. And this is the thing that, really sort of got me it just blew me away. As it started to step backwards, that's when it growled. And for me, it was just a warning. I wasn't worried. I'm not traumatized, but I am fascinated by what I've seen and heard. And it just started to speed up and walk faster and faster backwards. So the front arms, they seemed to operate quite well going backwards. There wasn't any problem there. A more natural fluid action, like you'd expect from any normal primate, I guess, including people. But it was the back legs that was extraordinary to watch. They were going through a huge range of movement, and they were rolling as they moved, and they did it really quickly. I don't know how to articulate that well enough for people to sort of understand exactly what I saw, but they were almost rotating through a sort of a 280-degree range of motion to allow that reverse walk to happen. It was quite extraordinary. Anyway, when it started going backwards, it was probably as quick as I could walk, but going in reverse. And it just reversed straight back into the grass and the thistles behind itself, and that was the last I saw of it. Growl was the thing that was interesting in that I didn't realise the impact that it had on my son. I was trying to chat to him about it about a week and a half ago. I said to him, I invited you to look at it a number of times, but you're too scared. And I said, do you remember the growl? Do you remember what noise it was? And he said, yes, he did. I think he's a bit, shaken up because he said his insides, he could feel everything vibrating and rumbling. And I didn't get that experience. I did get a little bit of a tummy tickle, but I certainly didn't get the same experience or have the same experience that he had. He's really, really shaken up. I instantly felt at the time blessed to see. I was excited. I was really, really, really excited. Just, felt really quite happy. I was like, wow, look at this. This is super cool.
When people report their insides rumbling and shaking and feeling quite shaky, we've got a theory or a hypothesis that it's potentially beings emitting some kind of very low frequency sound that your ears aren't really picking up, but your insides are vibrating too, and your inner ear. The army and the police use similar technology with sonic weapons. It's really, really low frequency, and it just makes you feel sick and uneasy and like you can feel your insides trembling, but you can't hear anything. Interesting that your son could feel it, but that you weren't feeling any of that at all.
It's not the first time that something strange has happened where we've had the same thing that we're looking at and a different experience.
Have you had other strange?
I don't see them as strange anymore. I just see them as, it just happened. I've seen plenty of UFOs.
Ah.
Yeah.
We'll get back to this amazing story because I'd love to look at that movement again. So this moved backwards like a spider might scuttle backwards without turning to look. It just moved backwards.
That was the thing that really sort of got me. Almost every animal, certainly mammal that I know, and I'm not talking about one that's in its home range, as in it actually has a designated house. Any type of mammal where it's got one step away from its hole in the tree or hole in the ground, they literally just throw themselves backwards and they're in there. This wasn't like that. It had maybe 2 metres to go backwards, but not at any point did it look like it had any doubts as to where it was going. And there was a gap in between the thistles and the grass. Absolutely no doubt as to where it was going and with regards to the direction that it was taking. It was faultless. It just went straight into the grass, into that gap. A normal animal would want to turn around and get their bearings and direction, and I've never seen a situation like that where an animal hasn't checked their surroundings and re-established their bearings. That was pretty interesting for me to see that.
And you mentioned when it looked up at you, it didn't have ease in that movement, didn't have much of a protruding head. Do you think it was really short neck and there's big muscles around the shoulders? Or
It's got really big neck muscles. It's probably also got a powerful jaw that's anchored the shoulders in some way. It was quite interesting. It was long-bodied and short-limbed, and the body shape was very square. That was the other thing that I was just really finding difficult to wrap my head around. The simple fact was that it looked like a torso that'd been beheaded almost in some ways. It was just so bizarre. As I sort of mentioned earlier, there was a little bit of a cone, a slight V-shape where the head was. I Googled to try and find out what Australian animal makes the noise that I heard. And I just hit wall after wall after wall. I couldn't get anything. And then this one particular Google search that I went and they said something about Sasquatch. And I thought, well, what's a Sasquatch? And that took me down the rabbit hole. So, seeing the images that have been drawn of them, it still wouldn't even do remote justice to what I was looking at in terms of how sunken the head was onto this torso.
I mentioned to Dean that I was speaking to you, Dean Harrison. As I mentioned to you, I interviewed someone, it was Atherton in Queensland. He was describing the same thing, a similar sort of strange movement like that on all fours. So he sent me a few photos of sketches.
I told Mum about 2 weeks ago. She said, just letting you know that if you mention our names, that we will discredit you openly and...
Go, Mum. That's hilarious.
I started to laugh.
That's funny.
And anyway, she did say to me, and besides, if you were that creature, would you want people coming here trying to take your photo? And I said, of course not, Mum. She said, well, don't give anybody the opportunity to know even where to look. We actually had the bow, but I chose to leave it in the mule that night for the bow fishing. And I thought, no, if we need it, we can come back and get it. The reality is I don't think it would have presented itself to me. It would have known I was carrying a gun. It wouldn't have shown itself to me.
That's interesting. You mentioned that in your email, that because of the vehicle that you were in, so noisy, like it didn't have a muffler, and it would have heard you a kilometre away and heard you getting closer and closer to it. Why did it stay there and show itself to you?
That's something that I'm really, I guess, in some ways perplexed about. But I'm also wondering, was it that invested into almost catching a fish that it thought, well, it's worth the risk? And as Mum said, I was sort of getting back onto it when I told Mum, she said, well, why do you think it was just there to catch a fish? It could have been getting a drink. And I thought, well, she's got a point. But then I thought, it can get a drink anywhere at any point on that creek. And it could have waited 2 minutes till I was gone and had a drink. To me, it felt that it was invested into something for just pure and simple reasons. To me, it looked like it was trying to catch something.
So it wasn't thirsty in the act of drinking when you saw it? It was still?
No. It was still. It was down low and low enough so that if there was a fish in that water, and if it could see it, it would have been difficult for it to see because it was so low. As I sort of mentioned earlier, there's a bit of a drop from the bank, sort of 30, 40 centimetres down to the water. So that's a sheer edge. So any fish looking up has to look up, can't literally look over the top of that little bank. And it was really low. It wouldn't have been able to be seen by fish.
Were the front limbs longer than the back, like an ape might be, and therefore the back is on a slant, or was it completely flat?
No, it was completely flat, and it was parallel with the ground. So the ground, I think from memory, it's about a 7 or 8 degree pitch going away from me, but it looked parallel with the ground. So to me, it didn't look like the arms were longer or shorter, or I do remember thinking that the back legs looked weirdly short. But, where the knee joint in reverse would be, it was down into sort of, the shadow effect of that down to the ground. And the back was really flat. It was just flat and square. Not like a pool table, but I don't know if you've ever looked at cattle. When they're really, really big animals, their back is quite flat at the top. But then obviously, they taper around. But yeah, it was just incredibly broad. I guess it was maybe a third wider than I am.
How wide would that be?
Oh, look, I'm pretty wide. I was a prop, 690, 700 wide.
And you reckon it was the same from the shoulders down to the bottom of the torso, or was it wider at the shoulders?
Yes. It may have been wider, but it wasn't noticeably wider. It was a pretty similar parallel torso.
So do you think it was on hands and knees? So could you see...
No, I don't think it was on knees. I think it was on hands and feet.
And feet. And they were out, so the limbs were out at an angle.
If I imagine a person or a monkey or anything that was doing the same thing, just it's spread out because we're so goofy and clumsy, and you need those limbs to be out away from the torso. Well, these were away from the torso, but they were only just. They might have only been 20 centimetres, and then it just from that 20 centimetres, so that whatever is the top part of the leg and the top part of the arm are relatively short.
And then there was a joint there.
And then it went straight down.
45-degree angle straight down.
Yeah. Just looked like that back knee joint had completely reversed. So it somehow completely dislocated and literally did a 180. I don't understand how that's possible, but unless it's a double jointed knee. So they've actually got two joints, a little bit like a dog bottom joint, or animals that have got literally two knuckles that go together, so they can bend two ways, and maybe that's it. But yes, it literally had reverse folded down to the ground.
And how long do you reckon those limbs were? From the torso to the bend, the knee, and then the knee to the ground? How long do you reckon they were?
They really weren't very long because it wasn't very high off the ground, but from the shoulder joint to the elbow joint would have been shorter, definitely, than the joint from the elbow to the hands. I don't really know by how much, but it was short-limbed, and the legs, they must have been really short. It was definitely parallel to the ground. Those hip joints were working super hard and rotating a long way to travel backwards. What was interesting, I guess, about all of that too, was as it was walking backward, funnily enough, I actually don't like saying it when I speak about this. It devalues It's, I don't know, I'm not sure what I'm trying to sort of express here, but it just seems to devalue the worth of the being as opposed to it being an animal.
I used to call them it, and I used to call them creature, or think of them more as animals. But after researching this for so long now and doing all these interviews and talking to people, I now firmly believe that they are more than just an animal, and I struggle to call them it. I understand what you're saying.
I could see a really, really slight curvature of the spine. Very, very, very mild. It still remained almost dead flat.
Did you get a feeling for whether he might be a male or she might be female?
I've given a little bit of thought to it. The first is that confidence that it carried clearly indicated to me that it was either older or strong enough to know that I posed no threat to it in any way, shape or form. You know, if it was a one-on-one punch-up, I was going to come off second best. So it carried that certain amount of charisma with regards to being very confident of its own self and aware of its own self. By the same token, did I get that confidence mixed up with curiosity? In a lot of species, I guess, you'd always associate curiosity with juveniles, but then you associate connection with females. So that has sort of played on my mind with regards to, why little person show itself to me. Was it because the female wanted a connection? Was it a junior mucking around? Was it an angry old man who just didn't care anymore? It was like, well, whatever.
Or maybe the being was deaf and couldn't hear you coming.
I did also wonder that, simply because we had the lights off. I can't understand it. You can literally hear that start a kilometre away. And it does have a muffler. It's a brand new vehicle. We know where Dad is at any one point, anywhere on the farm almost. Just, we can hear what's going on. What I do remember is the little one didn't turn its head in any way, shape or form. It didn't twist. It looked straight up. There was a parallel, even movement straight up.
Did you notice any difference in colour between perhaps skin around the eyes or on the face compared to the fur or the hair, I should say?
I did. The skin, it looked just like a cheap pair of faux leather black school shoes.
Was it dark?
It was dark. If anything, it was a very, very, very dark brown. When I looked at it, I think from memory, 3 lines. There was a longer bridge brow line, if that makes sense. I think I saw a little bit of the nose. There was no hair on it. The other one was definitely the cheek. The old gridiron footballers, how they put a little bit of that black boot polish under their eyes. That was part that was shining that I got the reflection off.
The eyes. So could you see any eye shine, like a dog reflects light?
Interesting question. Didn't see any eye shine. I didn't see any eye sockets. I didn't see any eyes. That whole pot was just black, just really, really, really black. Just nothing. It was just jet black. So I do think, and I do wonder whether or not it was, right, I'm not looking into that torch because I know it's going to hurt or upset its vision. I don't know if it physically hurts or not, but I did sort of consider that in the fact that it didn't continue to look up, but it looked pained with the way that it tried to look up or wanted to look up. Maybe it did want to look up, but it knew its eyes would be hurt and its vision would be buggered for the next couple of minutes. So
you said it looked pained. Was that what gave you that impression?
When it looked up very slowly. It didn't sort of look up in a quick way. If you're startled by something, you look across and there's a fast reaction. It just wasn't at all. It was very, very slow. It probably took 2 seconds for it to actually look up. And it didn't look up very far, as I was sort of saying earlier, but it's just a very slow, deliberate movement. And that's why I perceive that and say it did look pained. with regards to the action that it was taking. And maybe it's just a limited range of movement. I don't know. Could have also just been bloody humans.
It could have been. Just trying to picture this in my head. So is it directly across from you on the opposite side of the creek?
Yes.
So directly, and it's at the same elevation as you?
We would have been 3 metres higher.
Right, so it's not only having to look up from what it's doing, but look up further at you.
Yeah, yes. And the angle as well is sort of, 5 to 7 degrees, again, the other way. So it wasn't even as if it was, on a flat ground trying to look up. It was even more exaggerated because of the angle of that bank on the other side.
So it moves back in this sort of strange spider-like way. It moved back into long grass or shrubs. What did it move?
It's just long grass. I was just looking around with a torch and it's not coming back out. And my little bloke's just saying, come on, Dad, we have to leave. We've got to leave, Dad, come on. He was getting quite upset with me at the time. And I said, no, not yet, mate. We turned the torch out, which, nearly choked me at that point. But I turned the torch out and I went to night vision. I couldn't see anything because I was thinking, oh, look, if maybe it's, going to sneak away and we'll catch a glimpse of it as it sneaks away. But there's nothing. And it just makes me think that whatever it was just went back into the grass and literally just sat there and waited until we left. It knew that trying to get away would only cause disruption and make noise, and it would draw our attention back to its exact location. We probably looked with the night vision for, 2 minutes.
At the time, you weren't feeling very frightened. So I guess now when you're out bush, and particularly when you're at that property, how do you feel when you're there?
I was there probably 6 weeks after it happened. And at that point, I was still discovering Sasquatch and still learning about Sasquatch in America. I still hadn't even put together. What I had looked at was an Australian equivalent in a different, form. It still didn't occur to me because I had clues, I had information, I know what I saw, but I didn't have any answers in any way, shape or form. So it wasn't until maybe a couple of weeks after Christmas, I was listening to one of the Sasquatch Chronicle episodes. They mentioned the Australian Yowie. And I went, what? I was, at that point, sort of a little bit like the proverbial penny drop. That's when I went onto the iPad again, went looking for, Yowie and of course, Dean and you guys all popped up. Yeah, it was only then that I really sort of started to just go, oh, holy dooly. Interesting.
Double jointed legs, 280-degree motion while creeping in reverse. The pained expression as it gradually looked up in a slow movement. Could this posture and locomotion be a result of a lifelong deformity or something natural? Sometimes when knowledge increases, understanding wanes. For other Yowie reports telling of a similar posture, go to Yowiehunters.com, witness audio reports, and report number 179 from Atherton. Thanks for listening.